Welcome to Better Care Brief, presented by Harmony Thrive AI, where we explore the ideas, leadership, and innovations shaping the future of healthcare. Today, I'm joined by Pam Arlotto, President and CEO of Maestro Strategies, a nationally recognized healthcare strategist and a former National HIMSS President. In this conversation, we will explore how AI is reshaping healthcare, what separates true transformation from technology adoption, and what healthcare leaders should be prepared for next. Pam, welcome to Better Care Brief.
Hello.
Thank you for being part of this conversation. We know that healthcare is changing faster than ever. You have advised healthcare organizations on electronic health records, interoperability, value based care, consumer engagement, and I came to know you were big on AI too and very passionate about it. When you step back and look at the industry today, what feels fundamentally different from this transformation compared with everything healthcare has experienced before?
There's so many things, but I think what I'm seeing today is a convergence of change coming in so many different directions. Workforce challenges, financial challenges, digital and technological challenges, not to mention AI, but a whole variety of things that our approach to change in the past could be kind of a single work stream, implement an EHR or roll out a CRM or ERP or something to that nature. And we could really just focus on the very specific pieces of that. But today, there's change coming in so many different directions. And it's not just the wild, wild west. When we rolled out analytics, I used the term, we're in the middle of the wild, wild west. This is like exponential versions of that, 10 times, 100 times the level of impact. And I think most organizations are still approaching things the same way they've always done it. And it's going to take a very different perspective and very different strategy.
So, do you describe yourself as a system thinker?
Yes. Yeah, my original undergraduate was industrial engineers, which we are told to think about all the perspectives and how they come together. So that's always been way back in the days of Russell Ackoff, who launched systems thinking globally. I was a big follower of his to really make sure that you're considering all the variables and even all the constants for that matter when you think about organizational direction or change or transformation or innovation for that matter. You need to consider everything and specifically focus on what problems you're solving, because a lot of times we may define a symptom of a problem, but not necessarily the actual root cause or problem itself.
Great, and that brings a segue into what we discussed before, where you're very passionate about, because organizations sometimes approach technology or AI as another technology project, but transformation
Right.
is usually broader than technology. From your experience, what separates organizations that truly transform from those who simply deploy new tools?
Well, I think understanding today in particular that it's not just one type of technology that's driving the change. It's a convergence of multiple factors simultaneously. And those that recognize that and really have a repeatable approach to change, a repeatable strategy, and they're not just relying on the old traditional healthcare business model. We have a business model that is very facility focused in most cases. It is hierarchical or silo driven, whether it's your function like finance or clinical or business, or specialty, whether you're primary care or orthopedics or cancer care or so many other different specialties. And everyone likes to stay in their little bubble. And the ones that I think are going to conquer this and do well know they have to change the business model, And then it's more of a coordinated effort across and breaking down those silos as opposed to just living within the same decision-making processes, the same org structures, the same processes, and trying to, like you say, deploy the technology into that existing world as opposed to disrupting a lot of that existing world and thinking about the way it could be different. I think I probably think the best example of that is in the patient experience. It's very rare today that you see organizations truly look at the consumer before they are in the middle of a clinical episode and thinking about how they relate to them and their specific needs, and then designing the experience across all of those organizations and processes and specialties so that it is a true using digital tools to make that experience better and meeting the patient's expectations rather than just saying, okay, we're in the business office and we're redesigning revenue cycle and how we interact with the patient. That's just one small aspect of that individual's journey. And I think the organizations that can look horizontally as opposed to their vertical structures will do very, very well.
Every transformation comes up with a lot of learning curve in terms of understanding the technology, how to best use it, and getting on board with them. So it's people, process, technology coming together. I normally say this: work reimagined, right? But
Yes.
but today, most of the healthcare organizations are tremendously under pressure to improve quality, reduce costs, support clinicians, deliver a better patient experience, all at the same time. So, how does removing the silo helps, or doing these transformations really help?
Well, let me answer that by using an example. I met a surgeon recently. She's at Emory Healthcare here in Atlanta, and she was focused on how many denials she was getting for the prior authorization process for her patients. And so she said, well, I'm going to go understand this. And she spent time with the revenue cycle leaders and the people that were responsible for coding and prior auth. And she said, well, just go look at our notes and you'll understand the specific situation of why we're requesting the specific, based on the diagnosis and the specific surgery we want to do for our patients. And they didn't have, she found out they didn't have access to any of the clinical notes. And just that one small effort, when she bridged that silo, she found out a small solution and that she started working with them on a regular basis. So bridging the revenue cycle and the clinical side. And in the past, everybody's been in their own little bubble, working with their own little tools and their own little, we've always done it this way type approaches. And just her questions
Right.
really made a difference. And I think if we start collaborating and asking why, asking what if, exploring creative options. Unfortunately, our industry, you talked about systems thinking, our industry has a lot of concrete thinkers. I do X and that equals Y. And unfortunately, we have a lot of shades of gray and it's very complex. So we need people who are willing to kind of tease out that complexity and explore alternative approaches. Now, it won't always work, and we'll try some things and they'll fail, but we've got to be willing to take a few risks and at least explore and have those conversations.
So, in this example, where do you believe the technology or AI can create the greatest strategic value over the next coming 3 to 5 years? Where do you think this industry may be overestimating what AI can do for them versus what is realistic?
Well, I'm going to maybe reframe that just a bit. So I think it's not overestimating or even underestimating. I think it's maybe directionally thinking about it in a different, they need to think about it in a different way. And we don't suffer for lack of automation in the industry. We've got more systems and technologies and vendors. I mean, the average health system has hundreds, if not thousands, of different applications that they're having to kind of wrangle through. But what we have built in this complex system of all these technologies and all these automated things is a lot of systems that are in their little box, and the people are the glue. They cover the white spaces in between those systems. So if this system doesn't talk to this system, then there are people that are moving things around. If they're, let's talk about scheduling for a minute. When we schedule a patient, the system does a lot, but there are a lot of steps that are still very people driven. Outreach to the patient, looking at alternatives, looking at the clinician's preferences. There are just so many different things that people have to do to make these systems work. What AI is going to do, which people don't always realize, is it's going to replace the routine work that the people are doing as the glue between all this technology. So it will sit on top of these existing systems. Sometimes it'll be embedded in these existing systems. Sometimes it will help launch a whole new system or way of working. But in reality, I think I've mentioned to you before that when I first started this industry a gazillion years ago, we looked at the cost of healthcare, and 60% of the cost was labor. What is the cost of labor in healthcare today? It's still 55 to 60%. We haven't solved that problem at all. And now that, certain demographics are retiring or getting out of the workforce, there are not as many people coming along in younger generations. We're not going to have the availability of that workforce to do all that glue and work and routine work. So I'm really excited that not only can AI let us as professionals work to our highest bit of our license or our expertise, and not do all that routine moving things around and shuffling. It will allow us to cut the cost. We're not going to have those people anyway. So what if we got it to 50%? What if we got it to 40%? Oh my goodness. And put the people in, I believe it will put our clinicians, our financial leaders, and our other experts in a much higher calling and increase the satisfaction. And satisfaction has been a real issue for years, in particular since COVID. So I think there's a real opportunity to solve some problems that we may not normally attribute that technology could do. I mean, you look at nurses. There's always been a nursing shortage. And the satisfaction levels, people move from place to place, and they have the same issues wherever they go. But if you could bring tools that would free them of some of that routine work so they could really do the work that they got into nursing to do, like be with patients, or get into interesting, complex cases with their physician partners, that's very exciting to me.
Very well said, because what you just summarized is that technology, if it can take away routine work and they can focus on more creative and value-based work, creating more revenue or operational excellences, which indirectly or directly is going to impact the bottom line. So if you were, Pam, were to sit with the CEO of a healthcare organization that wants to embrace AI, but they are not sure where to begin, what is that one advice you would give?
Well, first, I would say think about it differently than you've thought about your other technologies. And normally, you'll see most health systems today have adopted very strong governance processes for technology. They'll say, what are our top priorities? How much budget do we have to spend, capital dollars? How many resources, how many people will it take to implement these tools? And so every year at budget time, the CEO will look to his people and say, okay, what are we going to be working on next year? I think what CEOs have to do is say, first, we have to get our leadership, AI, get some expertise around how AI is different. Do some thinking around how do we expect it to impact us, because there's so many different types of AI now. What might work for one organization might not work for another. And so how will we be using it within our organization? How do we get our leadership literate around how their decision-making approaches will change? We're talking a lot today about the real-time enterprise. In the past, CEOs and their executive team used a lot of dashboards and scorecards, and those all looked at the past. They would say, okay, what did we do in the last quarter or the last month? And they'd say red, yellow, green on our financial measures, on our quality measures, on patient engagement, whatever. Now, in a real-time enterprise, that CEO is going to have leaders who can get data in almost immediately, not exactly as it's happening, but pretty close to or near real time. And how is that CEO going to expect that leader to behave differently with that type of data? Are they going to expect proactive decisions? Are they going to expect them to make decisions in a consensus-based fashion like we often do in healthcare? I don't think that's going to work, because you can't get everybody around the table to make those decisions constantly in real time. So how will they behave in a real-time enterprise? And then the other thing that comes to mind with those CEOs is they're going to have to be looking not just at the information and the decisions within their enterprise, but how they extend the enterprise and work with others. You know, we talk a lot about payer-provider convergence. How are you going to work with your payers? How are you going to work with your partners across the community you're in or the broader ecosystem that you're in? Who are you going to depend on to help you accomplish your goals? It's not just one organization is going to be all things to all people anymore. No one organization can do that. So the CEO's got to think about the way they lead their team in a very different way. The last 10 years, what was that strategy? It was mergers and acquisitions. Every health system, either they were acquired or they acquired somebody else and merged with somebody else. That was the number one strategy. And all that's really done is repeat the old operating model. It's just bigger and more complex health systems. So the CEO is going to have to truly rethink their aspirations and their direction and how they will build different types of organizations with different leadership teams who make decisions very differently.
Let's talk about how do we avoid creating more complexity as part of these transformation?
Well, I always joke, and this is not to throw anyone under the bus, but I always say if you put clinicians in a room and IT people in the room, they can build the most complex system ever. And sometimes we just need to simplify and get down to that. What problem are we really trying to solve? What is just a common sense approach? And how can we use data to inform us? You know, we talk about people, process, technology, and I really believe we need to add that fourth category, which is the data itself. We still have a lot of semantic disconnects. In other words, I call something this and you call it that. And so our clinical data is truly uh, complicated and not always easy to analyze. So I think we're going to have an opportunity using AI to actually simplify things. And that I think is part of that process. Define the problem, look at what you're trying to accomplish, but also look at the whole landscape. What are all the data types? What are all the technologies that impact it? What are all the processes? What are all the org design? And truly say, how can we simplify this? How can we do things in a much more timely basis? How can we make it easier, not just on our decision makers, but on our patients and obviously the clinical team. So I think that's the work ahead of us. There's a framework that I use quite frequently called Martech's Law, and it actually got started outside of healthcare marketing, but it applies to all industries now. And it basically says the rate of technology change is exponential, and the rate of organizational change is very, very slow. And so you think about like 10 years ago, we'd bring out a new technology every quarter or so, maybe. Now, AI changes weekly. What we can do this week is so much more advanced than what we could do last week. And if our organizations haven't changed well in the way they do things in years, we've got to look at ways to to take a few risks, learn by doing, and raise the rate of that organizational change.
That's really important. Making things easier. Adaptation becomes easy when that mindset is created. And start thinking these complex solutions, taking one at a time, peeling it, solving it. But the AI journey is not smooth sailing, right? And we both talked about this before about how trust becomes the biggest barrier for AI adoption. The journey may be a little bit choppy. Where do you see this trust becoming the biggest barrier, and how do you want to overcome that?
Well, and no, I think that is the operative word right now, because you roll out something that doesn't. You only get one shot sometimes, and if you roll out something that doesn't work, you're kind of dead in the water for rolling out the next thing. One of the things that I see leaders wrestling with today is, should we get it from our existing vendors? Should we go and find some new vendors that are solving this problem in new and different ways? And then thirdly, should we build it ourselves? And the answer to all of that is it depends. It sounds like a consultant, but it depends. And there are some organizations that will be able to build some of these tools themselves, no doubt. But that's not the average health system. I think for many, I'm even seeing this with the amount of AI that the EHR vendors are making available to their customers. A lot of the customers are going, whoa, we're not ready for this. And I've heard everything from lockdown, we're not letting anything in here, to until it proves itself, to we're trying everything. And I don't think either one of those extremes makes sense, because if you're not learning today, you're already behind. And then trying everything, it can become a distraction for sure. But there are ways to, once again, prioritize. And I think the biggest way that we have to build trust is, one, recognize that it's an issue. And two, think about what we've learned in the past from getting our clinicians and our other leaders and our other staff to try new technologies. We had to do training. We had to do some change management, repeating. But the difference this time is that's not enough. We have to constantly build monitoring capabilities to see, has the AI veered off path from what we wanted it to do? Do our have the navigation expertise to drive it in the right direction? Do our staff even understand why we're doing this? And the blunt side of that is we haven't monitored those things very well historically, and we need to come up with new ways of tracking so that we can not just blindly trust, but it's back to the old trust but verify. But it's not a one-time done deal like you do with a new vendor in the old world where you verify by references and you test it before you go live. You gotta monitor it and make sure daily, weekly, monthly, year after year that you should still have trust in that system. That's a very different skill set than our industry has done historically.
It's absolutely true, Pam, because we talk about transformation outcomes. There are two aspects to it. One is the return of investment. The second most important thing that most of the people misses, especially the leadership misses, is the sentiments that is associated with it. Every single step through the journey, measure it, see if it really makes sense in dollars, makes sense to the people who are going to operate these things. I think it's a very valuable lessons for our viewers and the leaders who are watching this. Pam, you have spent decades helping organizations think differently about transformation. If there is one idea, just one idea you like healthcare leaders to remember as they prepare for the next chapter of AI,
that's a really great
that
question.
would be looking like?
I think there's a lot of fear out there, and I think that's because of the uncertainty. And there is another framework that I use historically about uncertainty, and it's a quadrant, and one quadrant is doing things the way you've always done them. Well, that's not going to work. Another is saying, well, I got 2 or 3 alternatives and picking the best one. And this framework's called the Cinefin framework. I can tell you more about it at a different time. And then the other quadrant is, how do we use data to inform us to make better decisions? And then the final one is, it's so urgent and so emergent, you don't have time. You just got to go with your gut and make a decision. And then in the middle is chaos, and that's when you don't make a decision. So I would encourage organizations they're most comfortable with the right side of that, or the 2 quadrants I described initially, because that's how they've always made business decisions. I'd really encourage them to shift to that, using data, using information, and helping that drive insights. You still got to be comfortable making those last-minute gut decisions. I mean, the greatest example of that was 9/11, when we had never seen this before, didn't know what was happening, and people just had to act. They didn't all make the right decisions, but they did make a lot of right decisions. And so in healthcare, you see that a lot when there's been like a pileup on the expressway or an airplane crash, and the emergency room's just crowded, and you got to triage and say, this one goes here and this one goes here, and we can't do anything here. But you're just making calls. But I think that third quadrant of beginning to use data, getting comfortable with using predictive models, prescriptive models, and AI can help a lot with that. Because I don't believe, and I do believe this is a goal for almost everyone, is that we get to personalized medicine. We're not going to get there using the same old models we've used, or decision-making approaches and business models we've used in the past. But data will really help us. So get comfortable with data, get comfortable with insight driven decisions, and then get comfortable with the things AI can bring to the table regarding how to use that data more effectively.
And thank you for sharing experience and insights today.
I've really enjoyed our conversation.
It has been a fascinating conversation, and I think our audience will take away with a deep understanding that successful AI transformation is ultimately about people, leadership, and work reimagined. And thank you again for joining us.
Have a great day.
And thank you, viewers, for watching this. Have a great day.